Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Very nice to see those of you who I can see. And once again, if let me just remind you that we do record these sessions, but you will only be on camera if you are speaking. So if you're able, it is very, very nice to see you. So if you're able to turn your video on, it makes it a little more of a party, and we appreciate it. So second housekeeping note, we will ask you again to fill out a summary or a questionnaire at the end, survey how you liked it. We've had very good responses, very thoughtful and helpful responses. We very much appreciate it if you would take a minute or so just to fill out a quick survey at the end. This is the end of round one of I&E Conversations. We're ending with a bang with Russ Glass, whom I'll introduce in a second. I believe the response has been positive, and we will have a round two. I know everybody's going to rush to the beach for Memorial Day weekend, so we'll skip next Friday and then pick up after that. That was a joke, by the way. Let me, we'll send out the communication, but please be looking for it. We'll do round two, another 4 conversations Friday. If you have strong feelings about the time, you can let us know. Of course, there's no time that works for everybody. Earlier doesn't help the people on the West Coast, but anyway, but we will try to sort that out. So thank you all very much for taking the time to join us for these conversations. We are very, very happy to have another Duke alum with us today, Russ Glass, who is the founder of a company called Ginger. I can tell from the questions, and we had a lot of very good questions submitted, that a lot of you took a minute to take a look at the company and are very interested. So we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the company as well as the general topic of culture. But let us begin by welcoming Russ Glass. Thank you, Russ, for joining us. Yay! Russ,
thanks for having me.
How about if I could ask you to start by just giving us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are now? That might be a great way to kick it off.
Sure, sounds good. And I'll clarify, I actually didn't found Ginger. I joined as CEO about a year and a half ago, which that's okay, which we'll talk through. But I graduated from Duke in '98, and I was a mechanical engineer and economics double major. I can't believe that it's been more than 20 years since I was there. I'm sure you hear this again and again, but it goes super fast. I started at Duke. I applied to a single school, and it was Duke, and I didn't have any idea what I was going to do if I didn't get into Duke, but I had always wanted to go. I grew up in New Jersey, wanted warmer climes, loved the basketball team, loved the vibe of Duke, and fortunate enough to get in early. I have always known I wanted to be an entrepreneur from high school, when I had a tennis racket stringing business that I had friends at different high schools, and I'd have them send me their rackets and I'd send them back to the tennis teams. That was kind of my unique distribution model for my tennis racket stringing business. At Duke, I then ran the Devil's Delivery Service. Some of you may have come across it at Duke. We delivered off-campus vendors onto Duke campus, and we had a monopoly on the points system off campus. So that was a pretty great little business that we were running there. And I was a part owner of the Hideaway Bar. Again, I don't know if all of you or if any of you know what the Hideaway Bar is, but it was an on-campus bar at the time, which was student-owned. After school, I, again, in an entrepreneurial vein, decided to go to a company called Trilogy Software. And this is actually an interesting story. It's a very entrepreneurial software company in Austin, Texas. I had an offer to go to Accenture Consulting and went down and got recruited by this company, Trilogy. I had an absolute blast. It was a perfect entrepreneurial culture, perfect way to learn my craft from an entrepreneur standpoint, but I didn't get an offer. I got a rejection. And was hugely disappointed. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to send the CEO a letter. And so I wrote the CEO a letter, and I told the CEO, look, you know, I loved what I saw. I think I'd be a great fit. Bring me down, and at the end of a year, you can pay me what you think I'm worth relative to everybody else. And literally within 2 hours, I had a formal offer for the company with a note saying, you're exactly the kind of person we want here. So that was a great sort of start to the career. And very, very quickly after that, founded my first company called Aegea Corporation. Absolute disaster in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. And a lot of learnings, a lot of failed entrepreneurial stories there. Left there, took some time off, and then started to kind of build, I would say, the more successful portion of my career. Joined a company called ZoomInfo, which was very successful, and I was the head of products and marketing there. Then founded a company called Bizzo, which is in the B2B data space. Sold that to LinkedIn, ran the marketing solutions business at LinkedIn for about 3 years. Took some time off to be dad, have 3 lovely girls, and then after did a little bit of work in youth voting during that period, and then joined Ginger in September of 2018. So that's a quick 22-year summary.
Most people are used to my lack of facility with Zoom by now. So tell us a little bit about Aegea and Bizzo, and how you would characterize the difference, and why one was a flop and the other was a success.
It's a great question. It's actually, when I think about my career as an entrepreneur, the reason that we were successful with Bizzo and the founding of Bizzo, I believe, is because of the lessons that we learned in founding Aegea. And when I founded Aegea when I was 23, I didn't know what I didn't know yet. I didn't have a huge amount of experience in the workforce, obviously. And the first huge mistakes that I made were from the very beginning. First of all, not thinking about the values of the company, not thinking about the kind of culture that I was trying to build, not thinking about the kinds of people that I wanted to be surrounded by at the company. And that led to a company that was full of the wrong kinds of people, that had the wrong kind of culture. And when things went sideways, as they always do, we didn't have that foundation to support it. You know, I liken it to the analogy of a house that's built to withstand hurricane force winds versus a house that just flies away in a hurricane. And Aegea was very much the latter kind of house. And throughout that period of time, not only did we have a lack of the right kinds of people, but I didn't get rid of the wrong kinds of people, the wrong culture fits. I didn't really know how to keep the company focused on what its core mission was. And so that turned out to be, all kinds of disastrous. We raised a lot of money. We were right in the thick of what the company did was the first apps for mobile devices. So this is before the iPhone. We were building consumer email apps, consumer and B2B email apps, messaging apps, etc. And it was obviously an incredibly important set of concepts. Sun Microsystems was actually our largest investor. We invented the Java micro edition spec with them. So we had a vision, but we couldn't stay focused on it, and we didn't have the right people. So that failed. Lost a whole bunch of money on that deal. About $16 million of investors' capital. But spent the next year really thinking through, okay, what went wrong here? And determining what I wanted my next founding experience to feel like and be like. And I never wanted to have to lay off 70 people in one day again and tell them we're shutting the company down and only 2 of us or 3 of us are going to the acquirer that bought us for some technology. So the next company, I went to Zoom Info, and I was not a founder there. I was an early employee, but learned a lot about execution, learned a lot about what it takes to be a successful scaling company. And then when I founded Bizzo, I took all of these lessons. And the first thing I did with Bizzo literally was write down the core values I cared about. And I wanted to build the company around. And then when I thought about the people that I wanted to found it with and the first 15, 20 people I wanted to bring on board, I was very focused on not only what skill sets did I want, but much more importantly, what culture fit did I want? What kinds of people did I want to surround myself by? And the difference was not only immediate, but it needed to be immediate, because Bizzo was founded in late 2008. For those of you who remember, we were in a similar period as now, just absolute financial, calamity. And the economy crashed. We went from $300,000 in first quarter revenues to $30,000 in second quarter revenues. And it looked like the company was going to fail. I had my first baby during it. So this was 08, or this is 09 now. So first quarter of 09, my eldest was born. And I thought we were going to shut it down, or at least there was a very good chance. But I sat the group down. We had 15 employees. Obviously, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, here's our option. We could either get heads down and try to recover from this, or we can shut the company down. And to a person, they all were the right kinds of people. They were thoughtful. They very quickly rallied around a plan. And we said, we're going to give this another go, even though the world is falling apart. But we're going to pivot a little bit into a different set of focus areas for the time. And that year, 2009, we did $2.5 million in revenue. And the following year we did 7, and the following year we did 13, 14. And by the time we sold to LinkedIn, we did 60 million in revenue that year. And so it just demonstrated to me the power and importance of the right people and the right culture to a company's success.
That's great. There is a very interesting and appropriate question from Hannah Freed, and I don't see her name, but then there's a couple of unidentified. Hannah, are you on the call? If not, I'm going to read her question. When is the right time to start a company? When are you ready? How do you know? She didn't ask the how do you know part, but I added that. But I think that's, do you think it was a mistake to start Aegea as early as you did? Should you have worked for a while first? Or were those experiences kind of necessary to put you in the position to do what you were able to do later?
It's a great question. I have a few thoughts. One is, an endeavor like this, a startup, you have to think of as a decade. Most startups are not a 1-2 year experience. They take time, they take energy. And so the first thing I would ask yourself is, are you so passionate about the company, the idea, what you want to start, that you want to spend the next 10 years on it? If you can say yes to that question, then sure, start the company. Get after it. I don't believe in you don't have enough experience to start a company. I think anybody can start a company, but I do believe in meaningful passion for what you're doing. And without that, it's going to be a slog, because the entrepreneurial journey, and again, this is something I learned very much after the first one, because I wasn't that passionate about the first one. I just wanted to start a company. I think that the entrepreneurial journey is very much a journey. You can't be looking at it as, I'm in this to make a whole bunch of money. I'm in this, to just flip a company. You really have to be thinking about this as you want to change the world somehow. You want to do something that is something you're absolutely passionate about. And I guess, John, what I would also say to this is that even with failure, which, by the way, not only you have to think decade, but you also have to think it's probably going to fail, because most of these do. But failure in entrepreneurship is just a step in the journey. And you may have heard this before, but it absolutely has been true in my case. You learn far more from your failures than you do from your successes, because you really dig in and think about what went wrong, and you evaluate what went wrong, and you make changes based on what went wrong. Whereas on the other side, when you're successful, you just feel like you're smart, right? You don't think that hard about why you were successful. And so I think it's always a good time, but think of it as a journey, be passionate about it. And if you fail, that's okay. Get back up and take all those lessons and apply it to whatever you do next.
That's great, thanks. And I want to come to your question in a second, Christina, but Daniel asked you answered the question of what's the right time for me personally? And he's asking the question about relative to the economy and social forces. Daniel, I don't want to put words in your mouth. How about if you ask your question and then, which Russ has sort of implied an answer to, but it might be good to flesh it out.
Yeah, so you briefly touched on how you founded Bizzo while the 2008 crisis went on. And if you look at it, there's a lot of huge companies out there that were founded during recessions like Apple, Microsoft, Airbnb, Dropbox. And so the question is, like, clearly it's a really bad time for everyone. So is it a bad time to start a company during a recession like right now? Well, it's not a recession yet, but during a crisis like right now, or it's actually an opportunity because now you have less competition if you can only, hold on and survive it?
Great question. I'm a strong believer in this being a huge opportunity in terms of timing to start a company. And I say that because a lot of the reason that companies are successful being founded in these periods are that there's huge discontinuities. And those discontinuities are always opportunities. The world is changing rapidly. The opportunity to look at what's happening, where's the world shifting, what's going to stick, what's going to go back, and to solve problems for people during those discontinuities and problems for companies during those discontinuities, hugely valuable and hugely important. And if I look back at Bizzo, just as a specific example, one of the reasons I think we turned out to be very successful during this period was that our business, we were helping B2B companies target business people more effectively. So we were helping them market to other businesses. And we had a platform that collected data, organized that data, and then provided it for these marketing efforts. Well, our data collection efforts were mostly from online publishers, B2B publishers. So online focused magazines as archaic as porkpacker.com, right? Porkpacker is the meatpacking industry. People in the meatpacking industry would read this magazine about the state of the art of pork packing. Well, we wanted data from them about their readership because we wanted to know who was going to porkpacker.com in order to organize that data for a broader, more scaled opportunity. Well, before the recession, we wouldn't have gotten the time of day from these companies because they were busy, they were selling ads, they had plenty of revenue, they had plenty of opportunity, and we were this little company promising them tiny little checks to start. During the recession, they would do anything for any additional revenue. So when we came along and said, hey, we're going to offer you the ability to make money on your data, they're like, sure, absolutely, sign me up. And by building that heft during the recession, we were able to sort of slingshot out of it. And by the time the recession was over, we were the leader. We were scaled in this huge data set. We had 50 million people that we were able to target, and kind of away we went. So absolutely think this is a great time to start a business.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks a
very
lot.
much.
Great question. Hey, Christina, how about asking your question? I think it's a great time for your question.
Yeah, sure. So my previous question was, what is the priority of a startup founder? Is it the patent, choosing the partners, or the investors? Also, I would like to add to my question, if I may, because I am working on a grocery app development, and I noticed there are several aspects of knowledge: technical, financial, design, legal. Can you suggest a point of contact at Duke to guide me to inquire about these fields?
So
We'll take the second part of that later, Christina, but what?
on the first question, you know, a founder really has to think about everything. So I wouldn't say that there's any one focus area of all the things you mentioned, because they're all important. But if I had to pick one critical component, I would say make sure that the product, the experience, make sure you really understand the value it's creating. So what are you solving for that isn't solved for today already? What is the consumer or member or experience for the user that's differentiated, that is meaningful, that is something they really appreciate? And get that right. That product experience is so important to where you're going to go in the long run, and just being able to get off the ground. I see a lot of startups that don't really think hard about why they're different and why they're unique and why they're differentiated and why that's gonna be the case in the long run, how they continue to maintain that differentiation. So I'd say that would be where I would be starting to think, how do I create a differentiated experience?
Yeah, my question is that after having done this, I have already done what you're saying.
Yep.
Once you've done this and you know like what's unique about your product, what would you take mostly into consideration? The patent, the partners, or the investors?
Got it. So it depends. I would say some products you can bootstrap, and depending on what market you're in and depending on how you're going to get access to those customers, you can bootstrap it. Some markets are highly competitive, and a patent is going to protect you from others that might come in. Although I haven't seen that be the case for most products that aren't highly technical in nature. It's hard today to get protection from patents. And part of the reason is that the patent protection process takes so long that by the time you get a patent on something, the world has evolved. The world evolves so fast now that by the time you get a patent, it's kind of irrelevant to you. Again, with the exception of highly technical or bio and pharma type applications. So it's probably not patents, would be my guess, but I don't know for sure without listening to it. And then the investor side of things, obviously, if you need capital to get it out there, then you have to think about investment. But it's always going to be far easier. You're going to have a better understanding of your business and story if you already have customers that are using this, even if for free, but you're getting they're getting product feedback from that, and you're improving the product. And then you can go to investors and show them what you've learned so far, how you've pivoted and changed and iterated on the product, so that what they're investing in is not just a unproven prototype, it's a beta, let's say. And the more risk you can take out of that decision for investors, the easier it's going to be to raise money and continue that journey.
Okay, wonderful. And it's interesting that you didn't say the first thing to focus on is the team, but I'm assuming that sort of implicit in this you want to build the team and the culture. I'd like, Gaurav, I'm looking over here because that's where you are on my screen. You had a very good question about culture. I wonder if you can ask that of our guest.
Yeah, John, I actually didn't write it down when I wrote it in. I think I just responded immediately. So maybe you have the right wording.
I have the wording, so I'll read it, and then you can elaborate if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Thanks.
what I have is, how do companies maintain positive and productive culture as remote work increases? What do you enjoy about being an entrepreneur that you don't find in other experiences? So they're, related, and would you like to add a little bit to that, Gaurav? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, just generally, I know myself, I'm just graduating and I'm planning on starting a job, not founding my own company right now or anything like that, but starting a job remotely. So I'm wondering, how can I kind of be part of building a positive culture? How can I, do that when I feel like a lot of what I bring to a team traditionally has been in person? And I think that that's something that's going to be a question more and more as time goes on. And then also just considering being an entrepreneur is something I've attempted and tried over the years as a student, but I think it's hard for me to kind of understand, or I want to hear your opinion on what is it that, you have gotten from being an entrepreneur that maybe you didn't really think you could get from another experience that keeps bringing you back to that.
Good questions. The first one, I think we're all learning. And I feel lucky that we have a little bit of an advantage at Ginger. Of the 150 or so employees that we have, 60% were remote already. So we had built capability structures to be able to manage this, and so now our HQ is basically shut down, but it's pretty similar from an environment standpoint because we'd already set it up. But we're also learning, and I think it's important that you recognize that you're losing some of the water cooler effect of people being together. So one of the things we're doing is being more thoughtful about over communication and making sure that people are receiving the message that may just not be traveling like it used to travel. So for instance, just as an example, I now do a bi-weekly video clip where I'm just talking for 5 minutes to the company and giving them my thoughts and helping them understand how I'm thinking about the world. And never did that before, but we felt like it gave emotion, it gave a little bit of color to, if I just wrote it, what might have been a dry communication. So that's an example of what we're doing. We are doing virtual happy hours at the company. So every Thursday evening, a bunch of people will get together and we'll all make our own cocktails and we'll just be on a Zoom like this and having a good time and just, talking about the pandemic and everything else, that's going on in our lives. We actually had a cabaret, believe it or not. So we're setting up events that are virtual events. This cabaret had 10 performers and it was family friendly. So we all brought our families and we went from act to act and it was a blast. So you can do it, but you have to be thoughtful about it. And we have a great people team that's working on it and thinking about how we create these shared experiences. You see this, we're sending one of these to every employee, things like that help bring us all together. The second question in terms of what do I get out of being an entrepreneur? The first question the first answer I'll give is, it's the only job in the world that you can completely choose who you work with every day. So think about that. You spend so much time at work. Why wouldn't you want to choose who you work with every day? Why wouldn't you want to choose who you're surrounded by every day? And so to me, the fact that I can largely control who I'm surrounded by, who I spend time with, the interactions, the day-to-day experience, that's what's so powerful to me about being an entrepreneur. I also think that, if you're the kind of personality that likes to solve hard problems and doesn't really like to necessarily conform to the rules that have been laid down by others because you think that sometimes they're laid down for the wrong reasons, it can be a great career path as well.
That's great.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're going to want to move to Ginger in just a minute, but let me just take one more question on this general culture thing. Nikhil, you had a question that I think might be a nice way to tie a bow around this.
Yes. Here, I'll get on video just for this.
Good. Let's see it. There you go.
Yeah, I was wondering, how have you been able to maintain your culture, and how have you found the challenge of maintaining your organizational culture as your organization grows? From my experience, it's something that a lot of times, it's easier for leaders to build and kind of, enforce the culture when it's a smaller group or smaller organization. But as they become a large organization, it can start to get a little diluted. So have you experienced any challenges with that? And I guess what advice would you have on that?
Another great question. And I've seen the same thing. I think there's a few reasons for it. And it starts one with what I described earlier, where like any house, if you have a poor foundation, then when you try to build an addition on the house or you try to build up, you're going to struggle with that. The house is going to fall over, right? So it starts with having a really strong cultural foundation and world-class people. I would say particularly in that first 50 to 100, because once you start with that bedrock of meaningful values, meaningful culture, world-class people in those first 100, then what happens is they keep the culture. Because each new person that comes on board, they are very focused on making sure they're not destroying this great culture that you've built. They take ownership over it. There's a really powerful concept that comes out of that. And so that's one, is making sure that you have that foundation really well built and you've got world-class people and you don't allow for, my ratio in my career is probably gotten to the point where I'm 90%. I miss still when I hire someone 10% of the time. And that's someone who's really looking for cultural attributes. But I still make mistakes. You have to be quick to act when you have a cultural problem at your company. Because any single cultural problem that the rest of the company sees isn't being taken care of can very rapidly destroy the culture of a company. And so I have a little matrix. If you are terrible at your job, but you're a great culture fit, I'm actually very patient. I try to help you find training, find the right fit. But if you're great at your job and you're a terrible culture fit, I let you go right away. Because I'm not going to I can't fix the culture fit problems. I've never watched anybody improve their own culture fit. And if their parents didn't get it right, I'm not gonna fix it, right? So that's one, is foundational. Then two is being very thoughtful about how you're scaling the culture of the company. Making sure that as you bring new people on board, what are you doing to inculcate them into that culture, right? In our case, we have monthly onboarding sessions where everybody at the company meets all the executive team one day a month, anybody new. And we're talking about culture. We're talking about values. We're talking about all of these things that we want them to know about how we operate so that they can start to feel ownership over that and build on that. Building activities like we have our weekly, what we call snaps, which cutely comes out of ginger snaps. So once a week, in our all hands, we get together and people give snaps. So it's just, what have you seen at the company that you want to raise up to the company level about why is this culturally an important thing? Why has this followed our values? What was awesome about what somebody did? Those kinds of things that help people feel and grow and be a part of the culture as you scale. But you have to be thoughtful about it. You have to be intentional, I think is the right word about it.
That's great. So tell us a little more about Ginger, Russ, and why was that the next opportunity for you, and what's great about the company?
After selling my company to LinkedIn and having a great experience at LinkedIn and taking some time off, I recognized that I still wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to go back to work and do something else, but it was important to me that the company needed to exist in the world. And if I've learned anything of late, it's that companies for the sake of companies are hard in my mind now to be passionate about. Solving a financial services problem is hard for me to be passionate about. Solving a B2B marketing problem like my last company is hard for me to be passionate about. My customers, my B2B marketers, if Bizzo went away, if our solution went away, they're slightly less efficient than they were before, but they'll survive. They'll be fine. So I was really focused on building a company that the world needed. And as I was thinking about ideas and ideating, I came across Ginger. And it was a recruiter who reached out to me and said, hey, I want you to look at this company. And I told him, no, I'm not going to take over somebody else's company. I'm not interested. And they said, well, I know what you're interested in. Why don't you just talk to them? Maybe you can be an advisor. And so I said, okay. And of course, yada, yada, yada. I absolutely fell in love with the company. And the company is an on-demand mental health system. And the problem that the company is trying to solve is that there's a huge supply-demand imbalance in the mental health space today. There are literally hundreds of millions of people around the world who have a mental health condition that aren't getting care. Estimate by the World Health Organization is about 60% of people who have a diagnosed mental health condition aren't getting care today. In the United States, the manifestation it's crazy to even contemplate. 50% of US counties have zero mental health providers within county lines. We have about 60 million people around the country that have a mental health condition, and about 40 million of them aren't getting care. So, and the problem is multifactorial, but it's lack of providers. There just aren't enough psychiatrists, psychologists in the world to support these people, and there's a stigma problem. So people don't go get care early enough before they get really serious. Ginger is trying to reinvent how mental health care is delivered to reduce that stigma, make it far easier to get access to care, and scale up the amount of care that you can provide per unit of supply per provider.
Forgive me. So I want to take a couple of questions. And ask, is Shrey Majumdar on the call by any chance? So there are a number of questions that relate to the current situation. Maybe Arjun, you're on somewhere, I think. Man, we get these great questions from people who don't join us. Don't tell me I'm going to strike out. Zach Chan. Okay, so the general gist of these questions has to do with the mental health environment caused by the current conditions, and how has that affected, the importance of Ginger's focus, et cetera. I mean, there's been some chatter or some talk about mental health, but not, that hasn't been the primary focus. How do you guys think about the situation we're in right now and the role of the company in this context?
Well, as I described, it was already a big problem prior to this period. And what we're seeing is a skyrocketing need during this period. And it's for a few reasons. I think, first of all, there are financial pressures and uncertainty, which causes stress to go up, anxiety to go up. there's social isolation, there's sleeping issues that people are having, which then is sort of a flywheel effect. You don't get as much sleep. You have less facility to manage anxiety and stress. You then get less sleep, and it sort of spirals. There is just general depression that we're seeing due to probably, again, social isolation and not knowing what's my future going to look like. So I think, and then there's just general fear of catching this thing, right? And not only you as a person catching it, but what if my parents get it? Or what if my grandparents get it? The general anxieties that are caused by a pandemic. We're at Ginger seeing, 150% increase in clinical sessions over the last 6 to 8 weeks, 80% increase in daily active or monthly actives. We're seeing increased intensity of conversation. We're seeing, 20% increase in people who are showing up clinically anxious or depressed relative to the period before. So it is absolutely, I think, the very beginning of a mental health pandemic in addition to the virus pandemic. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. I think this is actually the easier period relative to when we start to try to integrate again and try to get back out there, but we're not, there's still this massive amount of uncertainty, and then there's haves and have-nots. I mean, we have a period ahead of us that's going to be hard. And, I feel fortunate that Ginger, the system we've designed, turns out is pretty custom built for this kind of a period, because we're entirely virtual. We can be accessed if you have internet. We use things like Zoom to provide care. We have chat-based modalities for behavioral health coaching. And we're available 24/7. So anytime someone feeling the need, they can access Ginger. It doesn't mean it's easy for us. I think a lot of people look at a Ginger like, oh, that business is going to go crazy right now. Well, yeah, the demand is there, the product's there, but at the same time, we're selling to largely self-insured companies. We're selling to large businesses. As an example, Delta Airlines is our largest customer. So they've lost 95% of their revenue. We get paid on the number of employees Delta has. So, they have 100,000 employees today. They view us as an essential service. And so I think we'll absolutely continue to be supplying this for their employees who are dealing with really hard times, as you can imagine. But who knows what happens to a company that's lost 95% of its revenues. So there's risk there for us in terms of revenue. On the other side, sales cycles that were very close to closing have gone away because companies are facing similar issues like a Ginger. On the other side, we have companies who have said, we need to launch right away because we think the market's coming our direction and we need mental health support. So that it's a hard period, even for a company that, I think is going to generally benefit from the shifts, the shifting sands right now.
Let me just ask another question on that point. It seems that if Ginger didn't exist before this crisis, it would have had to have been created to respond to this crisis. When you look at the design of your service and the design of the company, and now you're in the position of this dramatic increase in demand, how well do you think that the design of the company, design of product and service stands the test of the current situation?
It's one of the things we're proud of, and you couldn't possibly test without a situation like this. So it's really created an interesting stress test for us. If you go back though, we thought that this was always going to be the case, right? So the vision was, this is how mental health care is going to be delivered. It might take 2 years, it might take 4 years, but we thought that eventually everybody would want to access it online because it's just far more convenient, it's far easier, and it works really well. It is an effective mechanism now that we have the technologies to do this. So we always thought it was coming, it's just a matter of when. Now, we've seen 2 to 3 years of acceleration in a 6-week period in terms of adoption rate, right? Because it's been forced. And clinical sessions, like I mentioned, up 3x or 2.5x, whatever it is. Our daily active, monthly actives up massively, and yet our response times are staying flat, sub 60 seconds. Our first available appointments, sub 9 hours still. So far, the system has absorbed all of this without missing a beat. And we thought that would be the case, but until you really test it, it's hard to know. I think for sure this is the kind of system that is designed for periods like this. But part of the reason is we knew there was a crisis before this. So we were designing for the crisis that nobody knew, or a lot of people knew, but at least nobody was really focused on solving for this massive supply-demand imbalance that we recognized the current state of the art, which was basically these large networks of providers, weren't adequate to solve for.
Yeah, that's great. Let's step back from the pandemic for a minute, and Ali, let me ask you to ask your question, if you would, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm just turning on my camera for everyone. Hi, everyone. Ali from Stowe, Vermont, where it just snowed. Where it just snowed last week, so you guys are all very lucky. Let me read my question off. So how do you make, and my perspective is really from the investor perspective, trying to grow a company that's in the health, wellness, and culture space. How do you make an argument to investors that health and wellness apps like Ginger, or forgive me if you don't consider this a comparable, or Headspace, is a pill and not a vitamin? Many investors struggle with the ROI of why a company's clients invest in health and wellness, or by extension culture, and how do you make that argument to an investor? There's no tangible data around it as easy as there would be, for example, in your other startups that you've experienced in the past.
Another good question. So first of all, while I think that the Headspaces of the world are great services, and I believe in mindfulness and meditation, and I believe in wellness and whatnot, we are very different. I mean, we're a hospital system, right? So we've got hundreds of doctors, clinicians. We're providing care, and so one big difference is just that, whereas you've got thousands of apps that can provide those kinds of services, you have very few that are literally providing healthcare in the way we're providing it, in 24/7 availability, everything from behavioral health coaching all the way to psychiatry and medication management. So there's a difference there. To your second question, just about ROI, I think that there's a lot of good data out there that shows the importance of focusing on mental health. So as an example, somebody who has a mental health condition is 2.5 times as expensive from a physical health standpoint relative to a person who doesn't have a mental health condition. And most of that comes from what we call comorbidities. So when you have a mental health problem, you're much more likely to have an issue like diabetes or a heart condition or some kind of back pain or other issues that manifest because of the mental health condition. So they're often comorbid, and that costs much more from a health system standpoint. So first of all, managing these issues drives healthcare costs down. Secondly, people who have mental health conditions, and I talk about the 20% diagnosed rate, but the estimate is that 50% of the population, so half the people on this call have subclinical anxiety, have subclinical depression, right? You have stress. You have these things that make you at once less productive, reduces your ability to be effective at work. Often, half of the workforce is missing 4 to 5 days a year due to behavioral health issues. So all of these are very meaningful costs that a company bears if their population isn't getting the support they need. And so what we come in is show that, demonstrate how we've seen this in the past. We'll apply their numbers to it, but help them understand that this isn't only the right thing to do because people need access to care and they can't get it today, but it's the cost-effective thing to do. And that's really how companies, I think, increasingly are thinking about mental health is we need to invest in this so that we can reduce healthcare costs, bend that cost curve, as well as make sure our employees are fully productive. And again, it's the right thing to do.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, Bisma.
Hi, my name is Bisma, and I just want to thank you so much for being a part of Ginger. I haven't personally used it, but I do suffer from mental illness, and I'm quite passionate about mental health advocacy. So this is really important to me. I actually want to do something in the mental health space myself in terms of like business or nonprofit. I'm not really sure. I have a question. I just don't know how to rally other people that might be just as passionate. How can you do that? Because I don't want to do it alone. I don't feel like I can do it alone. Maybe I can.
Good question. Well, first of all, thank you for being transparent. And I think the more people in the world that are willing to talk about it will help others talk about it and reduce the stigma that's out there about mental health, because it's just such a shame that people feel they have to hide it. To your question about doing it alone, one of the things that I recommend to people that are thinking about starting a business, that want to or passionate about something like this, is start writing. Start writing, start publishing, start getting your ideas out there, and you'll be surprised how you start to build a group of supporters. You start to build, you're telling the universe, here's what I'm interested in and passionate about. And the universe somehow then starts to come back at you. Someone reads it and says, oh, so-and-so, you should talk to Bisma. You guys have been talking about the same kinds of things. And, oh, I'm interested in this also. Oh, I actually suffer from this also. I didn't realize that you suffered. I mean, you start to, by being transparent and open. And the other thing about writing that I love is that it really helps you form your ideas. One of the things at our company that I talk a lot about is I don't decks like PDF, like PPTs and slide decks are the easy way out. Write about it, right? Give me a 2-pager on a concept, because it forces you to think versus just drawing nice little pictures that aren't nearly as thoughtful.
Thank you. I just want to say, like, that's a really good tip. I have my book coming out in June, actually.
Oh, fantastic. So I have to point out that if you think about Russ's journey, he told you that he had to be an entrepreneur. It was driving him. And then he had 2 experiences, one very successful. But at the end of it, he said, now I want to find a really important problem. He could have founded a company, but maybe you can comment on this, Russ. Instead of doing that, you found a set of people who had already created something that you could put your shoulder to. So you could still act in an entrepreneurial fashion, make something happen, move something ahead. It doesn't have to be the thing you invented. And, and also, I know in your original question, Bisma, you said start a nonprofit. I would submit to you that Ginger would not be able to help as many people as it has if it were structured as a nonprofit. But I'm putting words in your mouth, so why don't you tell me whether you agree or not, Russ?
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. I think, and frankly, I had to learn this as well. I was uncertain about joining someone else's culture, and I saw all kinds of hair on what they had built so far, and knew that I would have to change the culture and change a lot of the people. And that felt hard to me as someone who'd never come in and done that before. But at the same time, I recognized that this idea was so important and so big and so so aligned with the values of what I wanted to create and the vision of having a company that could literally change the world in a meaningful way, that it was worth it to me to come in and deal with all of those issues that the company had, to make the changes and ultimately make it a company that I thought could scale. And it's interesting. If I had to be maybe honest and slightly callous, potentially, I loved it. And part of what I loved about it was that I felt an emotional detachment that I hadn't felt before in the companies I had founded. I was coming in and I was fixing someone else's problem. And that detachment actually made me a more effective leader, because these weren't problems I created. The company really needed my help. And so it allowed me to make decisions more quickly. It allowed me to, act that in a way that might, in the past, might have been harder. And so I think it's even made me a better entrepreneur. If I started a company after this, I feel like I would bring a lot of what I've learned from looking at it in a detached way versus, a my problem way, that I think makes me a more effective leader of the company.
Wonderful. Well, we are about out of time. You may have seen the message from William. Please do give us your feedback, very important to us, and help us make these sessions more effective for you. So we'd appreciate it if you would do that. Russ, I'm going to ask you a last question before we thank you for your time today, which is, what advice would you have for people entering the workforce in the summer of 2020?
I would say I don't think my advice has changed, just because it's 2020 and it's a weird time. I would say, first of all, try to think about what you're passionate about. Doesn't matter if you're founding a company or joining one. I think having passion for what you're doing is valuable as much as possible. Is it something that needs to exist in the world? I think is a great place to start from a passion standpoint. 2 would be, seek out experiences that you can learn from. So seek out CEOs, seek out leadership teams that have done it before, that you really believe in, that you feel can teach you, because this is a journey. Don't expect immediate success. Expect to learn that and absorb, and over a body of work, you'll use those lessons. And then I'd say the final thing is, seek a culture that you feel comfortable in. Seek a culture where you feel like they're your people, that you enjoy spending time with those people. And if you can get all that right, something you're passionate about, great leadership and a culture, I don't really care what it does. Just go do it.
Thank you so much, Russ. Let's give Russ a big hand, virtual or physical. Thank you. It was great. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Stay safe, be well, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Bye. Take care, Russ. Thanks.
Thank you, Russ.